Hello everybody! Today we're going to talk about session 26, so let's get started. I am Ra. I greet you in the love and the light of the infinite creator. I communicate now. Questioner. The first question is any of the changing of what we've done here for the instrument going to affect communication of the instrument in any way? Have we set up here all right? I am Ra. This is correct. Questioner. And do you mean that everything is satisfactory for continued communication? I am Ra. We meant that the changes affect this communication. Questioner. Should we discontinue this communication because of these changes, or should we continue? I am Ra. You may do as you wish. However, we would be unable to use this instrument at this space-time nexus without these modifications. So, I don't know exactly what they're talking about here, what changes that they made. In the Book 5 info, it's very short. It just says it's still referring to Carla's illness due to the LSD. So I'm not sure if they altered the setup so that she would be able to breathe better when she was in trance, or what they changed about their ritual in contacting Ra. But whatever they did, it was necessary. And they did the right thing, obviously, because they wouldn't have been able to have this session if they hadn't made these changes. So this session is actually much longer than the last session. It's got 3 times as many questions and answers. And I assume part of the reason for that is because of sexual energy transfer. I'm guessing that there was a sexual energy transfer before this session when there wasn't one before the session before, because Carla is still sick. And Dawn will be asking Ra to cough intermittently throughout the session. And Dawn asks like every 5 or 6 questions or so, instead of relying on Ra to remember to cough at the end of each question, because that didn't work out last session. So I'm going to omit all of that. I'm going to not insert the points when Dawn is asking Ra to cough, because I think it's a little unnecessary and maybe even distracting. I know if you're reading it, then you just kind of skip over that part. I don't think it's necessary. So I'm just going to skip those ones to save a little bit of breath and to not distract from the rest of the flow of the conversation. So moving forward, 26.4, Dawn says, assuming that it is all right to continue, we're down to the last 3,000 years of this present cycle. And I was wondering if the Law of One, in either written or spoken form, has been made available within this past 3,000 years in any complete way such as we're doing now. Is it available in any other source? I am Ra. There is no possibility of a complete source of information of the Law of One in this density. However, certain of your writings passed to you as your so-called holy works have portions of this law. So we're going to go through a few of those holy books, but I think, Ra's response said there's no complete source of the Law of One. It's not possible to have that in our density. So I think that's probably kind of obvious, but Dawn believes that that's what they're going to accomplish here. And this is probably, obviously, the most complete source of the Law of One within our density. But obviously, it's not complete. This contact with Ra could have gone on and on if that had been possible, because the Law of One is infinite, right? It's not really possible to have all of the Law of One within one text. But in 26.5, Dawn asks, does the Bible as we know it have portions of this law in it? I am Ra. This is correct. Questioner, can you tell me if the Old Testament has any of the Law of One? I am Ra. This is correct. Questioner, which has more of the Law of One in it, the Old Testament or the New Testament? I am Ra. Withdrawing from each of the collections of which you speak, the portions having to do with the Law of One, the content is approximately equal. However, the so-called Old Testament has a larger amount of negatively influenced material, as you would call it. So, we know that from previous questions and answers, the Yahweh of the Old Testament was a imposter. They were not actually the real Yahweh. They were pretending to be the original Yahweh that helped the Martians incarnate on Earth. But instead, this imposter Yahweh just gave a whole bunch of rules and regulations. And my guess is that's a lot of the negative information that Ra is talking about here. And we know from session 16, when Dawn asks about the 10 Commandments, Ra tells us that positive entities would not tell you what to do to that degree. And the Old Testament goes well beyond the 10 Commandments as far as rules and regulations go. So both have approximately the same amount of positive information in regards to the actual law of one, but the Old Testament has somewhat more negatively oriented information because it did come from Yahweh, who Ra has told us was a negative entity. So 26.8, Dawn asks, can you tell me about what percentage is Orion influenced in both the Old and the New Testaments? And Ra says, we prefer that this be left to the discretion of those who seek the law of one. We are not speaking in order to judge. Such statements would be construed by some of those who may read this material as judgmental. We can only suggest a careful reading and inward digestion of the contents. The understandings will become obvious. So if you are one to actually read and study the Bible alongside your reading and understanding of the law of one, then the positive and negatively oriented information starts to become more and more obvious. And I know that's something that I'm pretty sure Jim has commented on in his blog, because he reads from the Bible every day as part of his morning offering, because that's something him and Carla used to do. So having read the Bible cover to cover several times, for him it became obvious which parts were negatively oriented and which parts referred to the law of one. All right, so in 26.9, we have the instrument cough. In 26.10, Dawn says, thank you. Have you communicated with any of our population in the third density incarnate state in recent times? I am Ra. Please restate, specifying recent times and the pronoun you. Questioner. Has Ra communicated with any of our population in this century in the last, say, 80 years? I am Ra. We have not. So this is a unique situation. As Ra says later on, they looked long and hard for this group, and they don't expect to find another group that's able to channel them in the future. The probability vortices for that are very, very small. So there are many quote-unquote Ra channelings out there if you want to look for them. From what I've seen, none of them have ever been in trance, and none of them ever passed the sniff test for me. And we know how easy it is for a negative being to pretend to be a positive being when contacted by an imperfectly tuned entity or group. So if you ever come across any other Ra channelings, I would just take those with a big grain of salt. But moving on. 26.12, Dawn asks, has the law of one been communicated within the past 80 years by any other source to an entity in our population? I am Ra. The ways of one have seldom been communicated, although there are rare instances in the previous 80 of your years as you measure time. There have been many communications from fourth density due to the drawing towards the harvest to fourth density. These are the ways of universal love and understanding. The other teachings are reserved for those whose depth of understanding, if you will excuse this misnomer, recommend and attract such further communication. So here, when Ra is responding to the question about the law of one being communicated, I think they're taking that question as, has any sixth density entity contacted us and tried to teach us the ways of consciousness within sixth density? And that's why Ra's saying no here, but lots of fourth density entities contact you. I would think that they probably do all of the time. But for a sixth density entity to make contact, the seeking has to be at a higher level, a level beyond basic metaphysical information, which is accessible and desired on the surface level by many, but the deeper information, like we get here in the raw material, isn't called for by nearly as many people, so there aren't as many windows for that level of seeking. But as we know, Dawn had studied channeling. Dawn was really just very into what the ETs had to tell us, and he was able to, with Carla and Jim, create a calling strong enough through their group for this information. Because Ra even says that, like, your group, at the very beginning of the book, your group wants more serious information, wants deeper information, and we can give that to you. And we're okay if you're the only ones who ever read these books. So while I do think there was probably a little bit more of a calling beyond just the three of them, that is what opened the window to allow Ra to come through. And if I may say, that is something I find about a lot of the so-called newer Ra contacts that pop up from time to time. It seems to me like most of them haven't actually studied the books that we do have. And I feel like for me, if I see a new Ra contact that I think is legit, that will be because it will be evident that the people who have tried to facilitate this contact have actually studied these books to a depth where they've reached an understanding where they're not just asking the same questions that are already in these books or asking surface level metaphysical type questions, because that's usually how that goes, because more often than not, it's people who read the books the first time, get really, really excited, want to do this, start channeling who they think is Ra, but it's still very surface information, and I don't think Ra is going to waste their time or breath doing that. I think that they need that deeper calling through a deeper understanding of what needs to be called. So that's here what Ra says. The other teachings are reserved for those whose depth of understanding, if you will excuse this misnomer, recommend and attract such further communication. So you get back what you put out. Your desire is a function of the type of metaphysical information that you're receiving. So that's why there's such a wide breadth of various types of channelings and metaphysical teachers and metaphysical students, because everyone's seeking on different levels. And the deeper you go, the more refined what you receive is. So, 2613, Dawn asks, did the Confederation then step up its program of helping planet Earth sometime late in this last major cycle? It seems that they did from the previous data, especially with the Industrial Revolution. Can you tell me the attitudes and reasonings behind this step up? Is there any reason other than they just wanted to produce more leisure time in the last, say, 100 years of this cycle? Is that the total reason? I am Ra. This is not the total reason. Approximately 200 of your years in the past, as you measure time, there began to be a significant amount of entities who, by seniority, were incarnating for learned teaching purposes rather than for the lesser of the learned teachings of those less aware of the process. This was our signal to enable communication to take place. The wanderers which came among you began to make themselves felt at approximately this time, firstly offering ideas or thoughts containing the distortion of free will. This was the prerequisite for further wanderers which had information of a more specific nature to offer. The thought must precede the action. So here is sort of relevant to the last question as well. About 200 years ago, or 240 years ago at this point, more beings who were of a higher seniority of vibration, we can say, began to incarnate for more specific learned teachings. And that's when more and more wanderers started to incarnate to facilitate those teachings. And the first round of wanderers really started seeding the concept of free will, so that then the collective would have that awareness of potential consciousness to begin working with. And then more and more, the higher spiritual, the deeper spiritual information started to come through these wanderers who were incarnating. So one reason the wanderers were incarnating was to help free us from work, give us more leisure time. They've done okay with that, I guess, relatively, somewhat, in some ways, compared to 200 years ago. I guess maybe, for some of us. And then they also came to help teach those who were of higher seniority of vibration, because here at the very end of the cycle, those who are the very, very closest to being harvested are the ones who are incarnating. So they are more receptive to this spiritual information and are going to be able to hopefully apply it to their life experiences so that they can make it to harvest. So 2614, we have a cough. 2615, Don says, wondering if the one Abraham Lincoln could have possibly been a wanderer. I am Ra. This is incorrect. This entity was a normal, shall we say, Earth being which chose to leave the vehicle and allow an entity to use it on a permanent basis. This is relatively rare compared to the phenomenon of wanderers. You would do better considering the incarnations of wanderers such as the one known as Thomas, the one known as Benjamin. So I find this response interesting. Obviously, it's really interesting to think that Abraham Lincoln is a walk-in, is what we call this phenomenon, is a walk-in. But Ross says that this is relatively rare compared to the phenomenon of wanderers. And at this point in time, Ross says that we have tens of millions of wanderers who have incarnated on the planet. So how relatively rare is a walk-in? I think that leaves a lot of room for a lot of situations where a walk-in takes over a human body and finishes out their life plan. I think otherwise Ra would say this is extremely rare or something like that, but relatively rare compared to wanderers. That could still be millions of people who are incarnated right now. So, I don't know, just something to think about. I don't know where you can go with that train of thought because, it doesn't really help to just start naming people you think are walk-ins. I don't think that's relevant or helpful to anything, but it's curious. So 2616, Don says, I am assuming you mean Thomas Edison and Benjamin Franklin. And Ross says, this is incorrect. We were intending to convey the sound complex Thomas Jefferson. The other correct. So I think Don goes to Edison because he's thinking of science-minded people receiving scientific information, because that's kind of the primary thing that we've talked about as far as wanderers being contacted by the Confederation. But if you know, Thomas Edison was not a good guy on any level. I do not think he was likely a wanderer. He was much more of a con artist who stole a lot of things from other people and claimed them as his own. But we don't need to get into that. Like I said, if you know, you know. But Thomas Jefferson apparently was a wanderer who also wasn't, the greatest person. Like we talked about before, he had slaves. He impregnated some of his slaves. These are not things that you would think of a pure good person would be doing. But he had a mission. He must have somehow fulfilled his mission because he's infamous and did a lot to create the foundation for America, which, for better or worse, is where I am right now. And we have this country. So, and Benjamin Franklin, he was a brilliant man who did create a lot of things and also was imperfect, but more imperfect in just the philandering way, just a womanizer. But, again, wanderers are just humans, and it's hard to be a human. And so it's just important, I think it helps put it into context. It helps balance the pressure we feel for being a wanderer and then how we manifest our human lives, because there are reasons for a lot of the things that we do and a lot of the ways that we behave. We don't just have missions to help change the collective. We also have personal catalysts that we want to deal with, that we want to balance within our inner being. So Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, they were both wanderers, but not Abraham Lincoln. He was a walk-in. So 2617, Dawn says, thank you. Can you tell me where the entity that used Lincoln, Abraham's body, what density he came from and where? I am Ra. The entity was fourth vibration. Questioner, I assume positive? And Ross says that is correct. And Don asks, was his assassination in any way influenced by Orion or any other negative force? I am Ra. this is correct. So a walk-in took over Abraham Lincoln's body. He was able to do some objective good as far as helping us move beyond slavery as a culture here in America, as direct chattel human slavery. So thank you to Abraham and the walk-in. But the Orion entities targeted him and were able to assassinate him, unfortunately. Who knows? Maybe he could have done much more good if he hadn't been assassinated. I'm sure he had other plans that led to his assassination. I don't have the details on all of that, but clearly there were reasons they took him out. In 2620, Don says, thank you. In the recent past of the last 30 to 40 years, the UFO phenomena has been known to our population. What was the original reason for, I know there have been UFOs throughout history, but what was the original reason for the increase in what we call UFO activity, say, in the past 40 years? I am Ra. Information which Confederation sources had offered to your entity, Albert, became perverted, and instruments of destruction began to be created, examples of this being the Manhattan Project and its product. Information offered through Wanderer sound vibration Nikola also being experimented with for potential destruction. Example, your so-called Philadelphia experiment. Thus, we felt a strong need to involve our thought forms in whatever way we of the Confederation could be of service in order to balance these distortions of information meant to aid your planetary sphere. So, Ra says that the Confederation offered information that began to be used as weaponry, because that's what we do here in America. So they were trying to push the tide in a direction that was a little more enlightened, and I think they came to the conclusion that the UFOs ultimately didn't help, actually made things worse. But the Manhattan Project, I think we're all pretty familiar with. It's just when we developed nuclear weapons, the experiments that we did that allowed us to make nuclear bombs. And the Philadelphia experiment is an interesting one. I don't know too much about it, but what I do know is that they were doing experiments on a naval ship, essentially, and they were trying to make it invisible. And they were able to do this, supposedly, presuming, since Ra mentions it and ties it in with Nikola Tesla, and I'm assuming that the reports of what happened during this experiment were true. They were able to temporarily make a naval ship invisible. However, when the ship reappeared, everything was wonky, let's say. The people were embedded in parts of the hull. People who were not injured in that way lost their mind, just kind of, totally lost their grip on reality after being made invisible by this technology. So that was what we started doing with the Philadelphia experiment. I am sure that even though it was a partial failure, since it was a partial success, that we continued then to study this technology and find other ways to manipulate light and matter to create invisibility, to force invisibility. But yeah, that's what the Philadelphia experiment is about. So the Confederation was trying to use UFOs to create an opening in our consciousness that would mitigate the negative effects of some of the other teachings that they had given us. But back in session 8, Ra did say that they backed off from that because UFOs in general only lead to more fearful thinking, more conspiracy thinking, and the potential for UFOs to expand our consciousness has been muddled, and the net effect of UFOs is more confusion and not less. So, 2621, Don says, then what you did, I'm assuming, then, is to create an air of mystery with the UFO phenomena, as we call it, and then by telepathy, send many messages that could be either accepted or rejected under the following, of course, the law of one, so that the population would start thinking seriously about the consequences of what they were doing. Is this correct? I am Ra. This is partially correct. There are other services we may perform. Firstly, the integration of souls or spirits, if you will, in the event of use of these nuclear devices in your space-time continuum. This the Confederation has already done. Questioner: I don't fully understand what you mean by that. Could you expand a little bit? I am Ra. The use of intelligent energy transforming matter into energy is of such a nature among these weapons that the transition from space-time third density to time-space third density, or what you may call your heaven worlds, is interrupted in many cases. Therefore, we are offering ourselves as those who continue the integration of soul or spirit complex during the transition from space-time to time-space. Questioner: could you please give me an example from, let's say, Hiroshima or Nagasaki of how this is done? I am Ra. Those who were destroyed, not by radiation, but by the trauma of the energy release, found not only the body-mind-spirit complex made unviable, but also a disarrangement of that unique vibratory complex you have called the spirit complex, which we understand as a mind-body-spirit complex, to be completely disarranged without possibility of reintegration. This would be the loss to the Creator of part of the Creator, and thus we were given permission not to stop the events, but to ensure the survival of the, shall we say, disembodied mind-body-spirit complex. This we did in those events which you mention, losing no spirit or portion or holograph or microcosm of the macrocosmic infinite one. So, we know from the Maldekians that this had happened before in our solar system. So the Confederation knew how to fix this problem, though it is a very big problem, and if nobody were to step in and fix it, the souls of the beings who are destroyed in a nuclear blast become so disarranged that they essentially cease to exist as part of the whole of the infinite creator. So here Ra is saying that this is one of the services that they provide to mitigate the damage done by the fact that we have started creating nuclear weapons and using them against humans. They work with these disarranged souls to help rearrange them so that they can continue being entities, being spirits. So just to nitpick the language here too, Ra says those who were destroyed not by radiation, so radiation death, poisoning doesn't cause the same. It's the actual blast that disarranges the spirit complex. Found not only the body-mind-spirit complex made unviable. So body/mind/spirit, when Ra uses these words, they see one thing, but the body is the first because they're referring to the body. When their body was destroyed, but this was a body, they don't see us as just a body. We're not just a body. And even when they refer to the spirit complex as just the spirit complex, they then make sure to add the caveat that it is a mind-body-spirit complex, because everything comes from the mind, and the spirit must come through the body in incarnation. So a lot of the times when they use these multi-word phrases, the first word of the phrase is technically how we would usually use these phrases, but they don't see the two concepts as separate. They just see them as two sides of the same coin. So, it's like if you flip a coin and it lands heads, that would be like heads/tails. But if it lands tails, it would be tails/heads. I'm not sure if that analogy helps anyone, but maybe it will. So, they weren't allowed to stop the nuclear blasts because they had a solution for the problem that occurs, the biggest problem that occurs from the nuclear blasts. They were able to fix it. And I will say that I know a lot of people are really super uncomfortable with this part of the material, this idea that because of a potential nuclear explosion that you could just stop existing. But I think you need to see through the rest of what Ra is saying is that the Confederation helps us not stop existing. They're able to fix us. There is a gap in time, essentially, where we're stuck, but we are able to then be released and then continue existing. So 2624 down says, could you please make the instrument cough and then tell me just vaguely how you accomplished this? I am Ra. This is accomplished through our understanding of dimensional fields of energy. The higher or more dense energy field will control the less dense. So I really think, that's vague, but from my understanding of the law of one, that this is an important spiritual principle of the hierarchy of energies, where a higher density energy can then have control over a lower density energy. And so that's why higher densities, positive ones, are so aware of the potential of infringing upon our free will, because this higher density energy is so potent and we're so impotent, veiled in third density, that it's easy for us to be swayed by those higher density energies. That's why there is so much energy in this book and these teachings, and why so many people are deeply moved by these teachings. You just have to learn how to put that into perspective in your own life experience without allowing it to infringe upon your choices in a way that eliminates your own free will. You can't just defer to Ra because Ra has more power than you. And Ra could, if they wanted, pretty much make you do whatever they wanted you to do. But it's far more important to use your free will than it is to give up your free will to a higher density spiritual entity and be their puppet and do whatever they tell you is the best way to be a spiritual being. Even if you don't end up being harvested, it's still better to use your free will, because this is how we give experience to the Creator. And this is how we protect the polarity of the higher density entities who might potentially be infringing upon our free will. So, the higher or more dense energy field will control the less dense. And I think this is important too, and we'll talk about this in the future as well. There are other comments about this. And I've already talked about this some too. The more you polarize, the more power you get. When you remain unpolarized, you are susceptible to those who are more polarized than you, because their energy field is more dense than yours. So as you polarize, you build up spiritual gravity. You aren't as easily moved by negative or positive beings. Obviously, though, the bigger problem is the negative beings who overtly want to control us, and can do that when we remain unpolarized and therefore confused, and are much more susceptible then to not seeing those negative machinations for what they are. We were talking about cults and cult leaders and evil gurus who put up this facade of you giving your free will to them for goodness. And if you're not very polarized, it's easy to be susceptible to that insidious narrative. But I think that's how a lot of people then break out of these cults, is if they are actually building their own polarity, at some point their awareness snaps them out of it. Their awareness makes them go, oh, this person that I've been following isn't a good person. They're making evil choices. They're controlling people. They're hurting people. And that's not okay, and I need to run away from that. And so you just have to make your own energy field more dense than negative beings' energy field. And that's why the positive polarity is so much better, not to make any sort of judgment like that, but, obviously I'm biased, but the positive polarity goes on. The negative polarity has to stop at the beginning of 6th density. It can't get any denser than the energy fields of early 6th density, whereas Ra is late 6th density, and they're positive beings, so their energy field is more dense than any potential negative energy field. So they aren't susceptible to negative beings because they've already integrated that portion of the Creator, and there isn't any negative beings who are at the point where they're about ready to hit 7th density because they can't go that far. I hope that makes sense. It's something that's really important to me, that motivates me to do the work, to be polarized, because then you just have, I don't want to say you have more control over your life, you're just less susceptible to other people influencing you in ways that if you did have more awareness, you wouldn't want to happen, if that makes sense. So, 26:25, Don says, but then in general, then you're saying that if you will allow Earth, the population of this planet, to have a nuclear war and many deaths from that war, but you will be able to create a condition whereby these deaths will be no more traumatic, shall I say, with respect to entrance to the heaven world or astral world, or whatever we call it, than death by a bullet or normal means of dying of old age. Is this correct? I am Ra. This is incorrect. It would be more traumatic. However, the entity would remain an entity. So, obviously, there's a lot of trauma because, like I said, there's a drag. You get hit with this blast. In most cases, well, in a lot of cases, as soon as you die, I don't know if I would even say in a lot of cases, eventually after you die, you realize that you're dead. And you realize that you're in the astral world and that you're done with that lifetime. I do think that that our consciousness can persist after our death if we do have some kind of a traumatic death, or if we're not ready to die. I think we just kind of continue to, quote unquote, live our life in the astral world. And so things aren't going to be exactly the same, and eventually you're going to realize something's different, and you will more slowly come to the awareness that you have passed away. Whereas some people, I think, know right away when they die that they're dead. Some may not, and some may take a little bit more of a process to coming to death. But these entities who are disintegrated by a nuclear blast, there isn't any engagement with the astral realm upon the cessation of the functioning of their body complex, whereas there is with all the rest of the entities who die. So that is very traumatic. I think our transition into death is so much of what happens is to protect us from trauma from that experience. But these beings don't have anything, everything stops. Everything stops existing. So it is a very traumatic way of dying, but you still get to remain an entity thanks to the Confederation helping out if you die from a nuclear blast. So here in 2626, Dawn asks, can you tell me the condition of the entities who were, shall I say, killed in Nagasaki and Hiroshima? At this time, what is their condition? I am Ra. They of this trauma have not yet fully begun the healing process. They are being helped as much as possible. So we know from Maldek it took like 100,000 years before they were able to become entities again, essentially. So the beings from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they are still tangled up in this knot of a lack of recognition of themselves, of anything. So they're being helped. They haven't fully begun the healing process yet. It's still in its very early stages, but they're being helped. So 2627, Dawn asks, when the healing process is complete with these entities, will this experience of the death due to the nuclear bomb cause them to be, shall we say, regressed in their climb toward the fourth density? I am Ra. Such actions as nuclear destruction affect the entire planet. There are no differences at this level of destruction, and the planet will need to be healed. So, this one always comes like a gut punch to me, honestly, because we've blasted many nuclear weapons on this planet, under the surface of this planet, in outer space, whatever. We've done a lot of damage with these weapons. So there's a lot of healing that still needs to be done to our planet, to our collective, that all of us have to engage in to be able to move forward and be completely within fourth density. And part of that is because when we're in fourth density, the planet is a part of our social memory complex. The planet becomes sub-sublogos with us and is conscious as a part of the social memory complex. So whatever we've done to the planet and whatever we've done to any entities on this planet needs to be healed, needs to be integrated and accepted. So here we're going to talk a little bit more about it. In 2628, Dawn says, I was thinking specifically, if an entity was in Hiroshima or Nagasaki at that time, and he was reaching harvestability at the end of our cycle, Would this death by nuclear bomb possibly create such trauma that he would not be able to be harvestable at the end of the cycle? That was specifically my question. I am Ra. This is incorrect. Once the healing has taken place, the harvest may go forth unimpeded. However, the entire planet will undergo healing for this action, no distinction being made betwixt victim and aggressor, this due to damage done to the planet. So, there is no distinction between the victim and the aggressor in this case, because some part of our consciousness, our collective consciousness, allowed this to happen. And part of that is because we have so many Maldekians who already destroyed their planet. We have so many Martians who destroyed their planet, not by nuclear blast. Maybe there were nuclear blasts that destroyed their atmosphere, but they didn't completely destroy their planet like Maldek. But Ra also says that we used nuclear bombs in Atlantis, and that's what sunk Atlantis. So this has been a part of our consciousness, and it's something that we need to heal and to move forward from. And considering however many nuclear weapons we still have on this planet today, I am not sure if we've really begun that process. I feel like they of this trauma have not yet fully begun the healing process, probably includes us and the planet as well. So we have the instrument cough, and then in 2630, Dawn asks, and then can you describe the mechanism of the planetary healing? I am Ra. Healing is a process of acceptance, forgiveness, and if possible, restitution. The restitution not being available in time-space, there are many among your peoples now attempting restitution while in the physical. So I really think this is so important because Ra says that healing requires some level of restitution, which is a physical manifestation of action. And I think that's really important when we think so much about how, our thoughts control reality, but restitution is not available in time-space, which is the thought realm. We have to actually take action to make restitution, to affect healing. I don't think that's just about our planet and this specific scenario. I think that is, because Ra says, healing is a process of acceptance, forgiveness, and if possible, restitution. So in regards to the physical healing of the planet, beings who are incarnated have to do that work. It can't be done by the Confederation sending love and light to the planet to try to heal it. The physically incarnated beings must take physical action as restitution for the harm that we've caused this planet. And I think that we all can do that in little ways every single day. We can take actions that are nourishing to our planet to counteract the actions that are destructive to our planet. And I will just briefly plug my Discord group again. We do a weekly planetary healing meditation on Sundays where we send love and light to the planet. And this is our way of trying to do this, trying to help heal the planet. As I'll just read the next one, Dawn asks, how do these people attempt this restitution in the physical? I am Ra. These attempt feelings of love towards the planetary sphere and comfort and healing of the scars and the imbalances of these actions. So any sort of healing energy you can send to the planet, any love, any comfort, just recognition of what has happened is so important. Compassion for the planet, these feelings can be very healing. And yeah, we do this in a group every Sunday, and we have actually 2 weekly meditations. On Wednesday, we have a meditation where we focus on the red ray, where we receive energy from the planet, because we're always receiving energy from the planet, but we have a tendency to pinch our red ray at the beginning of the pipe of our energy body in a way of rejecting the experiences that we're given, because our planet is very intense. So we have these 2 meditations that we do to try to integrate more and more with the planet, which I think is an important step, like I was saying, as we move into 4th density, as we become a social memory complex, recognizing that the planetary body is a part of our body and working with the physical planet in the same way that we work with our own physical bodies and seeking balance and healing. So if that resonates with you at all, I will put a link to my Discord again in this description. So you can come, you don't even have to, you can only participate in the meditations. There are people who do that. You don't have to chat in the Discord. If you want to come and just participate in our weekly meditations when it's possible for you to do so, we are more than happy to have you, because as we know from Ra, every single extra person squares the energy of the group. So the more people we have doing that work, the more potential power we have. So if you want to help us do planetary healing and integrate with our planet, consider hopping into the Discord. We can chat more about it, and we can be on this journey together. So, 2632, Dawn says, then as the UFO phenomena was made obvious to many of the population, many groups have reported contact. Many groups of people reported telepathic communication with UFO entities, and many recorded the results of what they considered telepathic communication. Was the Confederation, shall we say, oriented to impressing telepathic communications on groups that became interested in UFOs? I am Ra. This is correct, although some of our members have removed themselves from the time-space using thought-form projections into your space-time, and have chosen, from time to time, with permission of the Council, to appear in your skies without landing. So here Ra is saying, too, that they do occasionally have thought-form projections of UFOs in our skies. They aren't going to land on our planet. They aren't going to physically appear in our skies for anyone to see, but from time to time, they will reveal themselves as a thought form to those who are receptive to their mission, their teachings, their philosophy of the Confederation. So 2633, Dawn says, then are all of the landings that have occurred except for the landing when Eisenhower was contacted, are all of those landings of the Orion group or similar type groups? I am Ra. Except for isolated instances of those of, shall we say, no affiliation, this is correct. So that's a pretty absolute statement. Anytime that entities have actually landed on our planet, they were either Orion or they were highly advanced third density entities, highly technologically advanced third density entities who haven't entered fourth density yet, haven't become a part of the Confederation yet. So the Confederation is not going to land and walk around, and they haven't. And I think that's, like I said, pretty absolute in this question and response from Ra. Dawn says, are all of the landings that have occurred except for when Eisenhower was contacted? And Ross says, except for isolated incidences of those of no affiliation, this is correct. And again, this is important to Dawn because this is what he studied. He studied UFO contactee experiences, people who actually talked to entities, beings landing somewhere in their spaceship and walking out and telepathically communicating with beings, because that was something Dawn learned from his research, and a conclusion that he came to as he's asking, you can tell in these questions, he realized that when an extraterrestrial is communicating with an earthling, it's always telepathic. And so that was an important part of his research that he's, trying to verify here. But really what he's verifying then secondarily is that all of the beings that contacted people that he personally interviewed or researched and read interviews from their experiences, these were Orion entities or unaffiliated third density entities who had the technology to travel to our planet. So, 2634, Dawn asks, is it necessary in each case for the entity who is contacted in one of these landings to be calling the Orion group, or do some of these entities come in contact with the Orion group even though they are not calling that group? I am Ra. You must plumb the depths of fourth density negative understanding. This is difficult for you. Once having reached third density space-time continuum through your so-called windows, these crusaders may plunder as they will, the results completely a function of the polarity of the, shall we say, witness/subject or victim. This is due to the sincere belief of fourth density negative that to love self is to love all. Each other self which is thus either taught or enslaved, thus has a teacher which teaches love of self. Exposed to this teaching, it is intended that there be brought to fruition and harvest of fourth density negative or self-serving mind-body-spirit complexes. So, here Ra is saying that if you physically meet an extraterrestrial, they are most likely going to be Orion, but that doesn't mean that within you are calling for contact with a negative being. They found this window, and they are going to plunder as they will. I think they're most likely to contact beings who have called in an unpolarized way to meet entities from another density. But here what Ra is saying is that the fourth density negative believes that they are on the right path. They believe that they are seeking the Creator in the quote-unquote right way. They believe that service to self, that self-love, is a teaching that all beings potentially desire, and they want to increase their harvest too. So they're here to try to influence us to become service to self. I think that is more of a boon for them than just enslaving us. If we were to actually then polarize service to self, I think that ultimately gives them more power than just enslaving us. But they plunder as they will, the result's completely a function of the polarity of the witness/subject or victim being an interesting choice of words. And, as I've mentioned before from reading Dawn's book, most people who have this kind of experience don't come back from it. They kind of lose their grip. And I think part of that is because these fourth density negative beings have a more dense energy field, and the people that they contact are relatively unpolarized. So this more dense energy field affects them, and they may not want to be service to self deep in the core of their being, but it's still going to affect their energy body in a way that they can't quite comprehend because they don't have the spiritual awareness to understand how they're being affected. But I do think this is interesting because I hadn't really thought of that it does seem like it would be more beneficial to have more people negatively harvested than just enslaving people. I think enslaving people would be the secondary effect, having more negatively harvestable beings being the primary desire, and what then gives Orion ultimately more power. So we have the instrument cough, and then Dawn says, "Then I'm assuming all of the UFO groups who were getting telepathic contact from the Confederation were, shall we say, high priority targets for the Orion Crusaders, and I would assume that a large percentage of them were, shall we say, had their information polluted then. Can you tell me, do you have any idea what percentage of these groups were heavily polluted by the Orion information, and if any of them were able to remain purely a Confederation channel?" I am Ra. To give you this information would be to infringe upon the free will or confusion of some living. We can only ask each group to consider the relative effect of philosophy and your so-called specific information. It is not the specificity of the information which attracts negative influences. It is the importance placed upon it. This is why we iterate quite often, when asked for specific information, that it pales to insignificance, just as the grass withers and dies while the love and the light of the one infinite Creator redounds to the very infinite realms of creation forever and ever, creating and creating itself in perpetuity. Why then be concerned with the grass that blooms, withers, and dies in its season, only to grow once again due to the infinite love and light of the one Creator? This is the message we bring. Each entity is only superficially that which blooms and dies. In the deeper sense, there is no end to beingness. Banger answer from Ra, but here you see Dawn is still, I think reading this again, he's still specifically struggling with Andrea and Uri's contact that they had in Israel that obviously affected him deeply. And because he's friends with Andrea and he wants to believe that Andrea is good at heart, which I think ultimately he is, but yes, the contacts were very specific information, specific dates, go here, do this, do that. And as Ross says, it's not the specificity that attracts negative influence, it's the importance placed upon it. So Dawn asks quite a few specific questions, and there is a level of importance placed upon it by Dawn. And really what happens is we're willing, because we put so much importance on this specific information when we're seeking contact, right, that we're willing to be deceived in the name of proof. And I think that's ultimately one of the biggest ways that negative beings are able to influence us, because if you can tell me, if you can give me a direct answer to my specific question that's super duper important to me, then I'm going to believe anything you say, right? If you're a channeled being and you're answering my questions in that way, then I'll believe everything you say. If you think about, so many questions in this realm that we're talking about are earth changes, politics, history. These things are very important to people, especially like future predictions for politics and earth changes, even more than history, because people think that, if I just know when the next earthquake's going to happen, I can get everyone out of there. We can save everyone. We can protect everyone. They can be prepared for it to happen, which obviously isn't how that then plays out, because, you can't go to a whole town and say, such and such entity told me that there's going to be an earthquake here on this and this day, and everybody needs to take this seriously, because most people aren't going to take that as seriously as you. But sometimes in our heads, we think that that's how it's going to work out, and so it becomes very important to us to know these things. Or even if we just want to know for ourselves, if we just want to know, maybe a channeling group who lives in San Francisco is worried about when the next earthquake's going to happen that's going to take California off the map, And so you're asking these questions, and if an entity is willing to tell you, yes, it's going to happen December 16th, 2034, you can't prove that for 9 years yet, but it seems like if you believe that you're channeling an entity, which I do think most channeling groups are channeling an entity of some kind, and you have that level of proof to know that it's not coming from you or coming from the instrument directly, and it's so important to you, that's just an inroad for then the negative entities to continue their communication with you, because they're willing to answer these specific questions in a way that validates you, and then also validates their ability to have precognition of what might happen, when really they don't. Ra says that a lot. They only can see possibility probability vortices. Even if a possibility probability vortice, and this time right now today, is 99% that an earthquake's going to happen in San Francisco in 2034, that doesn't mean 100%. That doesn't mean that it's actually going to happen. But if the possibility probability vortex is 64%, and you get a group of people who start focusing, hyper-fixating on this date in the future, then you're just going to help open that possibility probability vortex even wider. And I really don't know. I think that's probably part of the function of why Orion tells lies like that, but I don't think that they actually have that much control over opening these possibility probability vortices. Otherwise, we would see some of these catastrophic predictions come true, which we really don't, right? It really is just a means of distracting and discrediting the instrument who is able to make contact with these higher density entities, and keeping them detuned enough to not receive higher information, to not create the call for the deeper understandings that Ra says needs to be created to receive those deeper understandings. Instead, a lot of people just want to get fixated on these surface things, this specific information. And the other reason I say that I think this answer has to do with Andrea is because they do mention before that they didn't want to infringe upon anyone's free will. They don't want to infringe on Andrea's confusion over what had happened to them. And also that Andrea was very focused on proof And so they can't really make specific statements in regards to what was happening with Andrea because he's so easily influenced by beings who are willing to tell him the way things are and tell him how to deal with it. And that's just not something that the Confederation is going to get involved in. They're going to step away, and then an entity of the negative vibration who is happy to puppet humans will step in and take over that contact. So we have a cough, and then 26.38, we have a long response just to prepare you all. I'm about ready to read from Ra for a moment. Don says, as you have stated before, it is a straight and narrow path. There are many distractions. I plan to create an introduction, shall I say, to the Law of One, traveling through and hitting the high points of this 75,000-year cycle, possibly a few questions into the general future. After this introduction to the Law of One, as I call it, I would like to get directly to the main work, which is creating an understanding that can be disseminated to those who would ask for it, and only to those who would ask for it, for an understanding that can allow them to greatly accelerate their evolution. I am very appreciative and feel it a great honor and privilege to be doing this, and hope that we can accomplish this next phase. I have a question that the instrument has asked that I would like to ask for this instrument. She says, you speak of various types of energy blockages and transfers, positive and negative, that may take place due to participation in our sexual reproductive complex of actions. She states, please explain these blockages and energy transfers with emphasis upon what an individual seeking to be in accordance with the Law of One may positively do in this area. Is it possible for you to answer this question? I am Ra. It is partially possible, given the background we have laid. This is properly a more advanced question. Due to the specificity of the question, we may give general answer. The first energy transfer is red ray. It is a random transfer having to do only with your reproductive system. The orange and yellow ray attempts to have sexual intercourse create, firstly, a blockage if only one entity vibrates in this area, thus causing the entity vibrating sexually in this area to have a never-ending appetite for this activity. What these vibratory levels are seeking is green ray activity. There is the possibility of orange or yellow ray energy transfer, this being polarizing towards the negative, one being seen as object rather than other self, the other seeing itself as plunderer or master of the situation. In fourth ray, there are two possibilities. Firstly, if both vibrate in fourth ray, there will be a mutually strengthening energy transfer, the negative or female, as you call it, drawing the energy from the roots of the beingness up through the energy centers, thus being physically revitalized. The positive or male polarity, as it is deemed in your illusion, finding in this energy transfer an inspiration which satisfies and feeds the spirit portion of the body-mind-spirit complex, thus both being polarized and releasing the excess of that which each has an abundance by nature of intelligent energy, that is, negative/intuitive, positive/physical energies, as you may call them. This energy transfer being blocked only if one or both entities have fear of possession, of being possessed, of desiring possession, or desiring being possessed. The other green ray possibility is that of one entity offering green ray energy, the other not offering energy of the universal love energy, this resulting in a blockage of energy for the one not green ray, thus increasing frustration or appetite, the green ray being polarizing slightly towards service to others. The blue ray energy transfer is somewhat rare among your people at this time, but is of great aid due to energy transfers involved in becoming able to express the self without reservation or fear. The indigo ray transfer is extremely rare among your people. This is the sacramental portion of the body complex, whereby contact may be made through the violet ray with intelligent infinity. No blockages may occur at these latter two levels due to the fact that if both entities are not ready for this energy, it is not visible, and neither transfer nor blockage may take place. It is as though the distributor were removed from a powerful engine. This instrument was able, as an example of this working, to baffle the Orion group during, the tape cuts out, but we can assume that Ra says LSD, experiences, as you call this substance, due to the fact that it effectively completely opened other self to third ray. We correct this instrument. It is growing low in vital energy. Green ray energy and partially open other self to blue ray interaction. May we ask if you have any queries before we close? All right, so that is a great big response from Ra about the nature of sexual energy transfers and how they relate to the energy body. So I will do my best to try to explain this. We talk more and more about this as we go forward, but this is Ra's introduction essentially to these concepts. So, in sexual intercourse, the red ray energy transfer is random. It only has to do with the reproductive aspects of the function of sexual intercourse. So, if you are vibrating in orange or yellow ray, certain ways to know that is if you have an insatiable sexual appetite. That is one way to know that you're not quite yet residing in the green ray. Another thing is the desire for sex that is in the realm of what I will say BDSM. And I'm not judging because I'm not putting a judgment or kink shaming or anything like that. I think it is something, though, that's important to be aware of. I don't think that everybody who is engaging in BDSM is necessarily also engaging in negative sexual energy transfers, but I do think that the bias is built from the pleasure that comes from those energy transfers. And if you see your sexual partner as an object and you see yourself as the plunderer of that situation, or the reverse, if you see yourself as just a object, a toy, a plaything for the being who you are having sex with, and you desire to be possessed by that person, these are symptoms of the orange ray. And ultimately, they are a consequence of wanting green ray energy transfers, because green ray energy transfer, sexual energy transfers are extremely powerful. And there is an instinctual part of us that is seeking those. But not everyone is there yet. And as Ross says, both partners really need to be there. If one partner is in the green ray and the other partner is not yet, then the partner who is not is going to become obsessed with their green ray partner and feel an insatiable appetite because they want access to that green ray transfer, but they're not able to unblock themselves enough to actually receive that green ray transfer, which is satiating, which allows you to feel like you got something from the situation, feel like it was enough for the time being. And there's kind of like a catch-22 with that, because if you and your partner are both in green ray, then you are having a lack of like intense sexual desire for each other, because those desires, that intensity of sexual desire comes from the lower chakras. I'm not saying that you don't have sexual desire for your partner, but I think sometimes that be kind of jarring. I do think a lot of relationships in general follow this trajectory of you get together and maybe you both already are starting to work in the green ray, but you still have some lower chakra things going on that create a lot of magnetic pull between the two of you, create a lot of excitement, a lot of intense feelings, maybe even drama. If you're able to continue a relationship for several months through that initial period of intense feelings, then you start to settle the orange and yellow ray distortions that exist between the two of you in potential, and you move into the green ray more and more for your partner. But the other aspect of that, if you're not used to it, is that it feels kind of wrong because it's not as exciting. It feels a lot more boring and maybe even bland because those surface feelings aren't driving the relationship as much. And so I think that's when a lot of people then jump ship and go try to find a relationship that engages those orange and yellow ray energies because it feels good. Like, an energy blockage doesn't always feel bad. An energy blockage can feel good. That's why it wouldn't work if it didn't feel good. So two people who are in a mutual green ray relationship are going to have a lot less drama, a lot less sexual intensity as far as just like desiring each other nonstop, feeling insatiable. Again, the insatiability is a big clue that there's some work to be done in those lower chakras. But if both people are in green ray and they can generate the desire to engage in sexual intercourse with each other and have green ray energy transfers, both partners benefit from that green ray energy transfer. As Ross says, the female, and here they're not saying that the female or the feminine is negative as far as service to self. They're talking about two ends of the pole, the negative and the positive end of the pole, not the service to self and service to others polarity. The masculine isn't service to others, feminine isn't service to self. But the feminine is associated with the negative pole, the spiritual pole, the metaphysical pole, and the masculine is associated with the physical pole. So in most beings, not all, obviously, in most incarnated beings, the male, the biologically male, has more physical energy, and the biologically female has more spiritual energy. And when you have a sexual energy transfer, you both give to each other some of the excess of what you have, and you both walk away with more than you started with. And so it's a very valuable thing that you can do with your partner to help balance the energies between each other and just to revitalize yourself. As we see here with Carla and Jim, Carla wouldn't be able to channel Ra. We wouldn't have nearly as much of the Ra contact as we do if Jim wasn't transferring physical energy to Carla, and then Carla also transferring spiritual energy to Jim. And then if only one partner is open in the green ray and the other partner is not, the green ray partner polarizes a little bit when they have sex with their non-green ray partner, because they're performing a service by attempting a one-way green ray transfer, but they don't get anything back. They don't get any sort of energy transfer back. And when it's two entities vibrating an orange or yellow ray, and one is the plunderer and one is the plundered gets all of the energy. The plundered is then in a deficit of energy because they're having their energy taken, harvested. And that's what makes a negative energy transfer. And when Ra first brings up energy transfers, which was like the last session or the session before, they mentioned that it's a very powerful, magical thing to do. So if you're listening to me talk about this and you recognize that you might have some orange and yellow ray distortions between you and your partner, if it's possible to find a way to work through those, it would be very beneficial to both of you. I mean, for many reasons, but in particular because the sexual energy transfer is incredibly powerful. And if you're doing negative sexual energy transfers, somebody is suffering. Even though it's pleasurable for both, a lot of the time, the plundered, the object, the sub is losing out ultimately. So Ross says that the green ray energy transfer is blocked only if one or both entities have fear of possession, of being possessed, of desiring possession, or desiring being possessed. So I think that's a really just important thing to be aware of in our own thoughts when we are engaging in sexual energy transfers with our partners or strangers. It's, again, no judgment. Not everybody has a partner, and sometimes, if you don't have a partner, you might be having sex more often with people who are not necessarily your partners. But ultimately, if you do have a partner, this is something that builds upon itself, right? The energy, the potential for the energy transfer can build and build and build, and you can work higher and higher through the chakras. As Ross says, the blue and indigo rays are very rare, and both entities have to be open in those areas for any sort of transfer to occur. The blue ray energy transfer allows, here Ross says, becoming able to express the self without reservation or fear. Later, Ra talks about how the blue ray energy transfer is really very valuable because our people are so dishonest. So the blue ray helps open you and your partner up to more honest communication with each other. And if you feel like after you make love that you have that kind of opening of communication, then it's likely that there was a blue ray energy transfer involved, even partial, because here at the end, Ross says that Carla, during her LSD experience, when she had sex with Jim, she was able to facilitate a slight opening of his blue ray so that they could have a blue ray energy transfer. Because she's usually in her blue ray, apparently more than Jim. So she helped Jim, and they had a blue ray energy transfer, whereas the Orion entities were hoping that they would have an orange and yellow ray energy transfer during her LSD experience. Because Jim then would have taken energy from Carla that then also weakening her, like the overactivity that she engaged in from the LSD weakened her. So it would have been an even more potent draining of her energy if that would have happened, but it didn't. And then the indigo ray transfer is extremely rare among your people. There aren't a lot of words for the indigo ray transfer. It's a sacramental portion of the body complex whereby contact may be made through the violet ray with intelligent infinity. So contact through the violet ray is our programming. And when I think of this, I think of that these indigo ray sexual energy transfers, if you can access them with your partner, which is extremely rare, but I think then you become so much more in control of your life experience because you're able to reprogram, you're able to come through the violet ray. So I think that's the benefit of the indigo ray sexual energy transfer, is this manifestation aspect where if you are working together, consciously working with this sacramental sexual energy transfer, then you can really write the script of what your life experience looks like together, because you're doing that together, you're penetrating the violet ray together, you're able to really do a lot. That's a really powerful tool to have in your toolbook. But again, both energies have to be open in the indigo ray and ready to receive that. Otherwise, nobody receives it because it's just too much. So that's why I think of it as a long-term project with a long-term partner, because you really have to build up to this. It probably is possible for two strangers to have indigo ray energy transfers, but again, it's rare for anyone to have these indigo ray sexual energy transfers, but it is a good goal to have. And Rod does say that later and very explicitly. So we will continue as we move forward to talk more and more about sexual energy transfers. It's a big topic and it's very important to Ra. Ra says that on Venus, that's something that they really focused on, was relationships and sexual energy transfers. So Ra has a lot to teach us about these things. I have some things to say from my own personal experience. I am not an expert, but I have experiences. So I will continue to offer my insights in this realm as we go forward, talking about these things in the future. If you have any comments or questions too, I'm always willing to try to answer them to the best of my ability, even though it is quite hard to talk about these things for many reasons. Still will try my best. So, we're wrapping it up. Don has Ra cough, and then 2640. Don says, the instrument asks, how long do the debilitative effects that I am experiencing from the use of LSD last, and is there anything that we can do to make the instrument more comfortable? I am Ra. Firstly, the period of weakness of bodily complex is approximately 3 of your lunar cycles, the first ingestion causing approximately 1 of your lunar cycles, the second having a cumulative or doubling effect. Secondly, this instrument is well. You are most conscientious. I am Ra. I leave you, my friends, in the love and the light of the one infinite Creator. Go forth, then, merry and glad and rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one Creator. Adonai. So, 3 months of weakness from 2 LSD doses is pretty intense, and unfortunate for Carla, who was already pretty weak. But this does then cause the desire for her and Jim to explore sexual energy transfers and how they energize her. And, toward the end of her life, her and Jim were still having sexual energy transfers often, sometimes daily. She would talk about it in her blog if they did. And she definitely believed that it was keeping her alive through her last decade or so of life when she was very, very weak and immobilized. And I know I read a portion of her blog, because most of her blog is gone, unfortunately. But there is an old blog spot of her blog that I read through, and she would often talk about how during their sexual energy transfers while they were having sex and for the time period afterward, that would a lot of times be the only time during the day where she was pain-free when she was experiencing injuries or chronic pain. So it was a very important part of their relationship, of their worship of the Creator, and of just taking care of Carla's physical body complex. And I think it was probably through this whole thing, this whole LSD experience even, that they were able to learn about that. So that was session 26. And I'm excited to keep moving forward. I think Dawn gets a lot more focused. I think, Ra's little parable of the grass helps knock a little bit of sense into Dawn about not focusing on specific information and trying to focus more on the infinite, on things that are important forever. Carla would describe it as, if it isn't important 10,000 years from now, then it's not important. But if it is important 10,000 years from now, then it's very important. So I think that's a good frame of mind. I think Dawn takes that into consideration more and more as we go forward. And I am now officially caught up on my mini project of catching up with my Discord study group. So now I have a backlog to edit and get out on YouTube. So I'm sorry for the drag that I've had, but hopefully I should get into a better rhythm now where I can get some edited, get them out there, have them coming out more regularly. I don't know if I'll ever have a regular schedule. I don't think I'll ever schedule them. I think I'll just do them as I do them and post them as I get done with them. So by the time you're hearing this, I've gone through that backlog and edited and posted them. And hopefully we're not too far in the future. It's the 20th. It's almost Christmas. We're in the holidays. And as I mentioned, I've got lots of stuff to do in regards to that, but this is important to me, so I'm also going to be working on this. And hopefully I think I'm on session 20 needs to get edited and posted. So hopefully I can do that in the next few days and get that out there for y'all. And then I'm going to keep recording and moving forward and talking about the Law of One with y'all. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for teaching with me. Thank you for seeking the One with me. And thank you to the One for giving us these beautiful experiences and blessing us as we dig in to do this work in consciousness. I will see you all in session 27.